What do you have to lose right now? I just think people are scared to fail.
Being able to understand what it means to have to wait, to be patient.
You're listening to the Yash and Company podcast.
Hey everyone, this is Yashanka Chalasani, and yes, you are listening to another episode of the Yash and Company podcast. So before we kick off season 2 of the podcast, where we interview some of the world's best 20 and 30-year-olds that span all sorts of different industries and sectors, I thought we could kind of take a second to talk about some of the things that are happening in the world around us today. Particularly for me, I've actually really struggled to reconcile the death of George Floyd and understand what my response to that should be. And so I figured, hey, why not reach out to someone that I know who is knowledgeable about these issues and have a conversation about it. So here we are. So on this episode, I reached out to Marcus Stroud. And if you are a frequent listener of the show, you know Marcus because me and him actually ended up doing recording this time last year. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, I definitely recommend that you check that out. He is very high energy and a whole lot of fun to talk to. But if you're not familiar with Marcus, here is a short bio about him. Marcus was raised in the small town of Prosper, Texas, and he accepted an offer to play football at Princeton University. There he received his AB in religion. After Princeton, Marcus went on to Wall Street, where he was a fixed income analyst at the largest and leading fixed income electronic trading platform company for institutional investors and dealers. After leaving Wall Street, he joined Vida Capital in Austin, Texas, a multi-billion-dollar alternative asset manager. After Vida, Marcus was recruited to lead the Clubhouse Investment Club, a conglomerate of celebrity investors looking to co-invest with top-tier VCs. Marcus sourced deals, conducted due diligence, circulated investment opportunities, and raised funds for individual deals. At TXV Ventures, which Marcus co-founded, Marcus will focus on fundraising, deal sourcing, and will have a particular focus on consumer deals. So in this episode, we actually start by talking about one of the most pivotal experiences in Marcus's life, which was actually him meeting then Senator Obama, who was campaigning to be the president at the time, and how that experience really allowed Marcus to know that racism wasn't something that is very distant. It was actually very close to him at home. We go on to talk about how Marcus has been able to conceptualize and understand the death of George Floyd and the things that are happening in the world around us today, and how Marcus sees certain ways to be very effective ways to respond to that, certain ways that maybe people react to and do that maybe aren't as effective. But I eventually talk about what Marcus thinks is the best way to go about creating change after seeing the world around us and some of the issues that we understand there to be. Marcus also goes on to talk about some of the issues that exist within the college environment when it comes to racism and prejudice, and also some of the things that he experiences once in a while in the investing world. He actually shares a few of those experiences and stories that are unfortunate, but also like seeing Marcus get fired up about that. It's a joy to see and hear. So without further ado, here is a long-form conversation with Mr. Marcus Stroud. Hey everyone, this is Yash. I am in Houston, Texas, on a Zoom call today with Marcus Stroud. Marcus, thanks for being on the show, man.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you, brother.
Yeah, it's good to have you back on. And me and Marcus were kind of chatting, or kind of just texting back and forth early this week after a few things he shared. And I realized, man, I wanted to have a conversation with him. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do that was because I've kind of realized that this time in America is something that I think we're going to look back on, and it's going to be historic. I think, not only is just this a like crisis economically, but I think we're having a crisis socially. And I don't know if we've had something like this before. I think typically, like whenever we have a crisis economically, there's always something that the country can kind of come around it with and rally behind. But it seems like it's almost gotten more divisive now, which is crazy. But yeah, the other thing is, I think for me, I've realized that, and I kind of want to be like upfront about this. For me, like I have realized that. There's a lot of biases that I personally have myself. I want to come to this conversation with that humility. Like I grew up in Alabama. I have faced some of this bias and prejudice and racism towards me personally. but that doesn't mean that I don't have those biases and prejudices and racial undertones myself, and I think I would be lying if I told you that those don't exist, whether like definitely unintentionally, and so anyway, Marcus, this is for you and anyone else listening as well. If I say something where maybe I misphrase something, or if I say something that just kind of shows that bias, do let me know. If anyone wants to correct me on that, just I want this to be an honest conversation. So that's kind of where I'm coming at this from. It's funny because it's funny because in med school, like we used to have all these discussions about social determinants of health, which are like these underlying systemic factors that affect people's like healthcare. And for me, I'll always start these conversations with, "Hey, I'm from Alabama and I went to school at Baylor." And it kind of became like this running joke because, I'd say that every time. But I like I said, I just want to be upfront about that. And
I appreciate that, brother.
Yeah. So Marcus, I think one of the things that would love to hear your thoughts on is that, I think one of the things we talked about in the first recording is that, in our upbringing, there's so many things that we learn. And I think some of the best lessons come from some of those experiences. And it seems like one of the most pivotal moments in your career, in your life so far, has been when Obama came to your house back in 2008. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about that and what you kind of learned from that experience?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so it's roughly 2008, late 2007. The date's kind of blurry in my mind. But my family had been doing a lot of work with Obama Dallas, just fundraising and supporting and just helping out any way they can. And so the chair of Obama Texas had reached out to my mother and said, "Hey, we want to do a very Texas friendly type event in North Texas. And given the fact that you all live in a very small rural town, we think it'd be perfect to have, Senator Obama come to your home and host a fundraiser." And they also knew that my family had some pretty strong connections with various celebrities and athletes. And so they knew that we'd be able to raise money pretty quickly for President or Senator Obama. And so that was it. We had people come to our house. We had some incredible celebrities, some incredible athletes come to our house. But it was a crazy time because, number one, this was crazy just in America because nobody had ever seen a black man make it this far to the presidency. So as a young black kid, that was really inspiring. But also it was crazy because, being from I'd say 95, 96% majority, predominantly white town, this was something they weren't really, accustomed to or prepared for. And so it was crazy. I come from a really good town. I need to preface that. I come from an insanely good town. I grew up around incredible people. However, just like anywhere you go in America, whether that's the Deep South, whether that's the East Coast, West Coast, you're going to have ignorant people. We had sent out free invitations to everybody in our neighborhood in Prosper, and not one person responded and said they wanted to go.
Wow.
They thought, oh my gosh, this is not something I want to be a part of. And, we had seen death threats. We had seen a ton of foolishness come through, our voicemail and our phone, just because it was something just so historic for a place like Prosper, but also for the state of Texas, especially North Texas. And so that was a little bit of my experience in that time. And, regardless of the threats, regardless of the ignorances people showed around that time, it was still truly one of the most pivotal moments of my life, just because being able to have the future president of the United States in your house was truly surreal, and being able to shake his hand. And I think regardless of where people align politically, when somebody has built a following so large that they have the ability to inspire somebody simply by a handshake or by a look, that is just something you can't even fathom. Like Yash, I'm telling you, man, watching this man walk around the room and shake like my grandmother's hand and shake like my black neighbor's hands, it was unbelievable. It was just so unbelievable to see the inspiration he presented. And I'm sure the same can be said for, other presidents when they were doing it. You definitely see it with President Trump and his following. But yeah, that is a little bit about my experience, man. It was awesome.
Marcus, how old were you at the time?
I was about 14, 15 years old.
Okay. And I think you said that I saw on social media you were sharing that people were literally throwing around the N-word at you, right? Was that at you personally, or your family? What was kind of like the?
Yeah. So I like to think that a majority of people are good, and they wouldn't be ignorant enough to say something like that directly to your face. Now, I know that it's definitely been the experience of some of my friends and family members, but I myself, nobody has explicitly said it to my face. The mediums in which I heard that word is like you saw on social media that I shared. I found a note with just the N word, more or less, in the mailbox. So that it said nothing else. It just said the N word. And, there would be a couple voicemails that were left on our phone that said, we don't want an N word in North Texas. We don't want an N word here for president. And it was crazy around that time. Also, I had been elected the first Black class president at Prosper. And from there, that was Prosper High School. I'd been class president at middle school as well. But from there, I'd been class president for 4 years in a row. But the first year when I was elected, there was an article that was released. I actually have it right here. It's pretty crazy. It says the new face of Prosper. And so when President Obama was elected, they were like, is change coming to town? Like Barack Obama and others, Marcus Stroud is trying to break down color barriers at Prosper High School.
Wow.
And so when the editor released that article to the Prosper Press, our town newspaper, he'd received – it's not like he received a crazy amount of phone calls, but he'd received a phone call or two with two people saying explicitly, I don't want an N-word to be the face of Prosper. And that's something that has stuck with me. So between the Obama situation where I found that note in the mailbox, and then between those things I'd heard from people at the Prosper Press, that's something that stuck with me since I was 15 years old. Nobody ever said it to my face directly, but I just heard it around me and through voicemail and all that.
Yeah, no, I kind of come from the same background, right? It's like no one has ever said anything to my face personally, but it's kind of the indirect thing that I think most people experience. So when you kind of look back at that experience, Marcus, what do you kind of take away from that? Like, how do you conceptualize that now that it's been 10, 12 years?
I think like it truly all begins at home. I think that nobody is born hating a race. Nobody is born hating anybody or anything, quite frankly. It's just something that's learned and taught at home. And I think seeing the difference in which the way some of the kids I grew up with Prosper were raised, and seeing the difference between some of the kids I went to college with were raised, it taught me a lot just about like how important upbringing and language is at home. And so like I said, Prosper is an incredible town. I grew up around some incredible people, and majority of the people there are going to be friends of mine for the rest of my life. However, there were still a few kids who, through learned behaviors at home and through some of their ignorance of their parents, they said some pretty awful things. And I just think that it's so important to really put yourself around diverse crowds, really make an effort to understand yourself, and really call ignorance out when you get around it. Just because you don't, it becomes a part of who you are, and it just becomes casual. It's like you said, everybody has prejudices. You have prejudice, I have prejudices. Everybody does to some degree. It's just a matter of, do I have the humility to understand that, and do I come from a place where I can say, that's wrong, I need to identify this, how can I be better? And I think I just learned the difference between the people who are willing to do that and people who aren't willing to do that, 10 years later in my life.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that I've been kind of picking up, Marcus, is the humility of knowing that like we are all wrong, right? Like we're wrong every second of the day. It's just kind of like part of human nature, and it's
exactly.
How do we like knowing that, like what do we do about it? So Marcus, like when you think back at, let's just say like you let's just maybe you can think back to an experience where someone has said something unintentionally to you, right? I think that's something that I experience pretty frequently. Maybe not like, it's not something I'm like conscious of all the time, but whenever I do, I know it's like there's a lot of mixed emotions that go through that. So I'd love to like ask you, what is like the framework that kind of goes through your mind as you're conceptualizing that, and then have you been able to develop a framework of like viewing the other person who has said that, or maybe like the group of people who have said something, so that like you're able to I think like not just combat it yourself, but also like react appropriately.
Yeah. And yeah, for surely, man, like there's been so many just offhand comments people have made where they didn't mean to come off as they did. They just happened to come off that way. And I think for me, the biggest thing I've learned in my life is that if you call yourself a Christian, you have to walk the walk and talk the talk. And I think just having a Christ-like mindset has been something that's helped me so far in my life. Just because it's like if I react and I pop up at the mouth or I'm so angry, it's like, is that what Jesus called me to do? Is that how Jesus would react? You know, no, he would respond in love. He would respond in understanding. He'd respond with kindness. And so I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I've always responded in this incredibly kind, Jesus-like way, but I do pride myself in that I've never really popped up at the mouth. I've never really yelled at anybody for saying something ignorant. I've always tried to come at it from a place of peace and understanding because, like I said earlier, you don't know what somebody comes from. You don't know somebody's background. You don't know somebody's been raised to believe. And if I respond in anger to that person, now we're just two angry people saying ignorant things to each other, whatever we accomplish. But if I respond in love to that person, if I respond in kindness to that person, then that person's like, wow, like maybe what I said was so wrong, but I'm so grateful that he responded in love to me. I'm going to think a little bit more before I say anything like that again, you know? And that's just my mindset. And I'm not telling people that's the way you should think because everybody has different pains. Everybody has different hurts. Everybody has different responses to hurt. That's just how I go about framing my mindset.
Sure. So as we're like kind of thinking back about recent times, right? We're seeing, it's almost 2 weeks since the death of George Floyd. As you kind of look back at some of your own experiences, like how have you been able to think about that death? And I'd love to start with that.
Yeah, number one, it's heartbreaking because it's like yet again another Black man has been put to death by a person in a position of authority. And so when I think of my experiences, I'm just so grateful that I've never been in an altercation with a police officer, or I've never been in a situation to where something could be perceived as an altercation with a police officer. And that's just something I think about. But it also gives me a ton of fear because I'm just like, man, my two little brothers, I constantly need to check in with them and make sure they're not doing the wrong thing. They're saying if they get pulled over by a cop, they're extremely cautious and they're extremely quiet and short and just to the point. And the same thing with my buddies who are Black. And so that it's been tough just because I never want to live in a fearful mindset. God has not called us to live a fearful mindset. However, given what happened to George Floyd, given what happened to Ahmaud Arbery, given what happened to Breonna Taylor, I don't know if I have any other way to live, And so that's just me being extremely candid and honest with you, is that I know where God has called me to live and how to live. But right now I'm struggling with that because of what I've seen in the world. And so that's kind of been my mindset the last couple of weeks, the last month, if you will.
Sure. It seems like you're trying to be wise about it, but the thing that I'm kind of hearing from you is the wise thing to do seems to be proceed with caution.
Exactly.
Which is tough. So have you, as you've been kind of in conversation with people about the death, let's just talk about like last 2 weeks, right? Because that feels like more people are like coming to the conversation table because of it. Right. And we've seen like even like protests come about from all of this, right? And those have kind of escalated. Most of them have been peaceful. What are some common misconceptions that you've kind of heard and had to address from people? Because it seems like, and I've seen you like post things on social media. It seems like people have come to you with them. So I'd love to hear some of those things and like what those conversations have been like.
Yeah. And I want to take the time to really just thank all my friends, and thank anybody who's listening to this that have reached out to people or that have just genuinely had questions or curiosity about how to respond in a time like this. So I think the first step into helping unify our country is empathy, and I think just having empathy for the situation and having humility. So it's like, okay, I may not understand the situation completely. I may not understand the pains of a certain group of people. However, I'm going to have humility in understanding that. And I'm going to have empathy for their emotions and pain. And so, like I said, coming from an extremely diverse background between a small rural town in Texas and, a liberal, Ivy League institution like Princeton, I have friends from all different backgrounds. And I think some of the responses I've gotten or some of the questions I've been asked is, what can I do? What more can I do to help the Black community? Am I wrong for thinking that we shouldn't just be focused on the Black community? We should be focused on all communities. What more can I do in my workplace to help disenfranchised communities? Is it okay for me to be conservative, to be, liberal and have this viewpoint or have this viewpoint, And it's like, I'm not an all-knowing person. I am just like everybody else trying to figure out how to best respond to people, how to best love people, how to best understand people, and how to best, reach a point where we can have conversations about reconciliation in our country. However, the way I'm going about this is just one by one, just giving people my honest opinions. And so, Yash, those are some of the questions people have presented me over the last week, and some of the things I've been, somewhat struggling to answer wholeheartedly.
Sure. So maybe let's just talk about a couple of them that I've been noticing, and maybe we could kind of dive into those specifically.
Yeah.
So my roommate is African American. He's like a brother to me, and I've roomed with him for about literally 3 years now. And so, he's come up to me and kind of said the same thing where, he'll get a ton of these texts from people wanting to help out, or even letting him know, hey, I'm an ally. Right. And which is kind of an interesting word, I think, because I don't know if he's ever heard that in a different in that context. But and I think he's kind of come from that with different perspectives. There's certain things that people say that really hit, he appreciates it, and then certain things that people say where he feels a little uncomfortable. And I think one of the words that he's kind of mentioned that I think he's struggling with, it almost feels like this is like people are trying to check off a checklist. That's kind of the phrase that he used. So for people that feel they should do something, right? They're understanding that this is an issue. They want to do something, but you don't want anyone to feel like they're checking off a box and that text that you sent them or a message or a phone call is a part of that checklist, or even doing something as part of activism, as part of that checklist. What are some things that maybe you've noticed that people do not well, and what are some things that people can do so that it's appropriate? It's an appropriate response that people can have.
Oh, that's a great question. What are some things that I think people do that are not well? What are some things that people can do that can have an appropriate response? I think just simply posting a million different things on Instagram and not actually taking any sort of initiative or action towards those posts is something you can do that's not well. It's so easy to follow a trend of posting these really colorful, cool graphics on Instagram, on your story, to show people, hey, I'm a part of the movement. Hey, I'm woke, if you will. Hey, I'm a part of this. Respect me. I'm your ally. But what are you doing to actually create change in America? What are you doing to actually take it to the next step? Are you donating money? Are you reaching out to a friend, not for the sake of checking the checkbox, but for the sake of trying to understand more about this movement? Are you thinking about your own prejudices and ways that you can improve upon that just by yourself? You don't need to have a conversation with somebody to check yourself and be like, wow, I do have these prejudices. How can I be better about that? And so I think some things that my friends have done extremely well is, I have a teammate. He was our captain. He's one of my close friends. His name is Matt Aarons. And Matt, called me and another one of our teammates the other night, and we had an hour-long conversation about things that he can do to be better, and things that he knew he had done wrong in the past, being around people from all different nationalities and things he just didn't understand, quite frankly. And I think that was incredible because, an hour-long phone call in a time like this, that's as genuine as it gets. And I'm not saying that people need to have these long kumbaya phone calls with everybody, but just doing something that just feels authentic and genuine to you is going to be fine. It's going to be good. But also, this is a time when people need to understand that there's going to be a lot of uncomfortability, if you will. There's going to be a lot of discomfort right now. And you need to embrace that discomfort, because the more you can embrace that discomfort, the more that, we can reach a place where we can have a conversation about reconciliation in America. Because things right now aren't, kumbaya. We need to address the ugly things in society. We need to address the ugly things in our interpersonal relationships. We need to address those things because that's the first step, And we're never going to reach a place in society where everybody's extremely happy. Every race is fully satisfied with the respect they're receiving. But like, if we can just have this consciousness to where we know that things aren't right and we're constantly trying to improve upon those things to be better, then that's how you become a much better society. And so I think those are some of the ways in which people in my network, people in my world have done to be better from a personal perspective.
That's good. I think those are some of the similar things that my roommate has talked about as well, is like, you can tell when someone is being genuine versus when someone is telling you, hey, like, I donated money, I'm doing this, I'm your ally. And it's like, those are two different things. Like, if you're using your talents to, raise money or, put on an initiative, right? And you're like asking for support, you're not saying that you're an ally, but you're doing it. And so I think like, there's different ways to go about it, but I think, definitely actions speak louder than words. And sometimes like, kind of like you said, it's, just being intentional. And if that includes the conversation, at least like, you can do it with those that are close to you. And that means a lot. Whereas, like we said earlier, like just blindly like texting people, I feel like I didn't even know about that till my roommate brought it up, and I thought it was kind of crazy.
Yeah. I've gotten a lot of those. And like, don't get me wrong, I love hearing from my boys. I love hearing from my friends from college. I love hearing from people I grew up with, but like, let's take it a step further. Let's take it a step further and let's see how much more we can do.
Yeah, that's good. So let's go on the other side, Marcus. And, this is something that like I have really struggled with because I think there's a lot of different perspectives on this. I just like don't honestly know how to navigate it. And I'd love to have see what you think. So I think you're in a city, that, protests happen and sometimes these protests turn violent. Right. And I think there's, if you go on social media, you'll see examples of both sides, whether it's the police or the protesters maybe being more aggressive than it need to. So, and there's a really good quote from, who's a guy that's late night with, Trevor Noah. And he's got this great line where he says, there's no good way for a black man to protest in the country. And he talks about how like Colin Kaepernick, kneeled down and he did it peacefully. And now you have people like on the street and they're like, hey, like back then you said that's not right. And now you're saying I can't even like protest. So it's like, I think he's got a point on that, but, knowing that these things can turn violent, like how do you kind of approach it? What is kind of the best way to be an activist, vocally or even like through protest? Like how do you kind of reconcile those things? And like, what do you kind of suggest to people?
You have to do what feels comfortable for you. You have to do, let me take that back. It's not about what feels comfortable for you. You have to do where your heart is led, So whether if your heart's led to going out and protesting in a peaceful manner, then that's what you need to do. If your heart is led to getting on Twitter and calling out ignorant tweets, then that's what you're led to do. If your heart's led to posting on Instagram and then, tagging friends to start initiatives or going on LinkedIn or approaching your employer about, hey, let's do some more diversity in focused initiatives, that's where your heart's led to do. It's all about where your heart is because you don't want to do anything simply because your friend or your group is doing it. You want to do something that your heart's led. And I think Trevor Noah is right. There isn't a great way in the eyes of society for anybody to protest, but at the end of the day, you got to not care about what society says. You got to just do what you want to do simply, and I think like there's a time and place for everything. I strongly condemn violence. I strongly condemn looting. I think neither one of those things progresses the agenda of the African-American community and of the United States, quite frankly. That is, I will openly say that is definitely not the way to do anything because that's just calling for attention at that point. And that's taken away from the incredibly amazing efforts of so many people right now. But I do think that, going out and protesting, or if you don't want to protest, handing out water bottles to people that are going to protest, or, just saying, hey, my heart and love is with you today. I'm not protesting, but I'm going to support you in this. And if there's any like charity I'm going to donate to, that's great, And I just think that like we've reached a point in our country where we just have to actually take action. And that's what I love about our generation. And when I say millennials, I say Generation Z, like Generation Y, like we're taking action. We're waking up. And it's not just about like the Black Lives Matter movement. It's about a bunch of other things. It's about the environment. It's about just having voices, whether you're a conservative or a liberal. It's about just having a voice for once in our country and not just being okay with the status quo, And I think that is just so incredible because there's this intellectual consciousness that's awakening right now that we need to just embrace. And so, sorry, that's a tangent. However, I just think that you got to go where your heart's leading you when it comes to protesting or just taking action in tangible ways.
Oh, that's good. I love that. Mark, is there any one or two things that you see in the national conversation that are missing right now? I don't know. I think right now our country on so many different issues, it's so partisan this, partisan that, partisan this, partisan that, partisan this. Human rights is not a partisan issue. Human rights should not be a partisan issue. You should not be perceived as a liberal simply because you choose to go protest or simply because you choose to show empathy towards these people. You shouldn't be mocked as a conservative simply because you're doing something, simply because you're opening up conversation. And I think nationally, because of the media, because of just so many different factors, people are making this a right or left issue. This is an incredible country full of incredible opportunity, full of so many different groups of people. Let's stop amplifying this on, and I'm calling out the media networks, quite frankly. Let's stop amplifying this on CNN. Let's stop amplifying this on Fox. Let's stop the BS. And let's just talk about, like, how can we all come together as one to help this? Because ultimately we all want the same, well, the majority of the country wants the same thing, equality and opportunity for everybody. And so I think right now, so many people are so beat up on making this a conservative versus liberal issue, but people are not talking about the incredible efforts of groups like SoftBank. People aren't talking about the incredible efforts of groups like Andreessen Horowitz or Goldman Sachs, where they're creating funds to help, increase diversity amongst companies or amongst boards. Like, that's incredible for everybody. That's opportunity for everybody, not just one group of people. Let's embrace that. Let's talk about that. And let's quit talking about how incredibly awful each side is, Like, let's just take a break on that for once. And I think that's missing from the national conversation. Oh, that's good. I think that's one of the things that I've really struggled with is, one of the things I always kind of go back to is one of the things that I always kind of a focal point for my time in college was understanding that like exactly what you said, like human rights, human flourishing is a left and right issue, and like, I think sometimes we forget that, like, such a small subset, like it's like 20% on the left, 20% on the right. Majority of this country is right in the middle. But most of these issues just they get taken to be perceived as left versus right. And it's so frustrating because, like, someone like me who's very much in the middle, who understands both sides just from a lot of different perspectives, is like, you don't want to seem like you're picking. And I think unless we change that conversation as, like, this is all of us together, I think it becomes tough. But I mean, that's something that we've seen throughout history. So hopefully that's
right.
We can kind of swing back to where it needs to be. But Marcus, I know that you've kind of led some efforts back at Princeton, trying to educate some of the alumni network. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And I'd love to hear, there's on that website, there's a ton of like books and recommendations and stuff. If someone wanted one book to read and one video to watch, whether it's a movie, whether it's a TED Talk, what are the things that you recommend for people, or what's like the one thing that you think is good to reference?
Yeah. So I guess that's a two-part question. So I'll address the first part, and then I'll talk about like books or movies somebody can watch to, kind of better educate themselves. And so I guess from the Princeton perspective, I've been fortunate to where I come from an incredible class of, classmates, a great class, 2016 at Princeton. And, with the efforts of some of my classmates, we put together this website called Tigers for Justice. And Tigers for Justice is essentially a website that just creates resources for people to read articles or watch videos or watch movies or just listen to various podcasts talking about racial inequality in America and the history behind it. And so I think for me, it's been so incredible, and it's made me so blessed to go to a place like Princeton because, they put that at the forefront, not only of our class, but of every class at Princeton and of the entire Princeton network at large. And, you're seeing it at other universities also, because that's where it starts, so much of our thoughts, so much of our opinions comes from our alma maters, if you attend college. And so to have your alma mater kind of, spearheading, conversation on, really difficult and tough things is incredible. We were fortunate in that a incredible modern day, civil rights activist by the name of Bryan Stevenson, who has just led so many incredible movements right now, Alabama guy. He's actually an honorary member of the class 2016. So some of the resources we've been sharing with people are, anything about Bryan Stevenson. So an article I recommend people read is an article in the New Yorker called Bryan Stevenson on the frustration behind the George Floyd protests. And, I think that's an incredible article for people to kind of understand on a deep level why there is so much frustration from the Black community around that. As far as films, Fruitvale Station, Selma is like an incredible movie. Selma is something that brings tears to my eyes, and it's an incredible movie for anybody to watch to get more educated kind of on the civil rights movement and some of the incredible figures. Documentaries, the Central Park Five, the untold story of Emmett Till. If nobody's heard about Emmett Till, that's something you should definitely read. I think that's where brutality amongst African American males deeply stems from. There's just a lot around that. And one of my favorite movies, it's not perceived to be a movie about civil rights, if you will, but it's a movie about just an incredible figure in American history by the name of Cecil Gaines. Cecil Gaines was a butler in the White House, and the movie's called The Butler. And Cecil Gaines was a member of the White House from, I believe, the Eisenhower administration up until the Obama administration. And so that movie is just so incredible because you can see some of the things he dealt with through various administrations, through various places in the country, and just how hard it was for an African-American male to really reach a level of success. So anyway, those are just a couple resources that I highly recommend people read. And as far as a good book, the autobiography of Malcolm X, it's a really, really good book.
That's good. A lot of those I have not heard of yet, so I appreciate you for mentioning that. And I kind of want to go back.
And Yash, I want to say it takes time, man. It's not somebody's job to go out there and I'm going to read every book. I'm going to watch every movie. Because if you do that, you're going to be an emotional wreck for the next month. Because a lot of those books and movies are incredibly difficult. They're incredibly graphic and they're incredibly hard. But it's just about I recommend people start at the article level, work your way up from an article level, then maybe watch a movie and then eventually read a book. But if you try to jump into something extremely heavy right now, you may miss the mark just because it's that difficult. So I just, like I said, take your time, start from a place and then work your way up.
Yeah, that's good. I actually saw something on social media the other day. It was something about ways to not get burnt out through activism. And I thought it was I was like, are you serious?
That's perfect.
But it makes sense. I can kind of understand that now because it gets so emotional, right?
For sure.
So I was thinking about, we mentioned college, and that's something I wanted to go back to because that's something that we also talked about on the first recording. And I think it's so ironic, that we're talking about a place that promotes equality, right? But it ends up being a place that actually has a lot of prejudice, which, a lot of reasons for that. You have college kids that are growing up and they learn a lot of these things, some bad. But, recently I was actually trying to mentor this high school senior who's trying to pick between Baylor, where she got into a really, really great program there, and Stanford. And one of the things that she talked about was, man, I really want to go to Stanford because she felt like it was a safe haven for diversity. And one of the things that I had to kind of make a point of is, there is a lot of diversity there, but there's inequality that exists in a completely different way that you might not get at Baylor.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting that, these racial issues are things that you're going to see everywhere. And I was just kind of wondering, as you kind of reflect on your time at Princeton, what are some of those things that you've been able to kind of think back about and be like, man, like that place, maybe you could like shed some light on like that kind of experience?
Yeah. Like I think you hit a good point down. I think that you're going to experience diversity and you're going to experience racism anywhere you go in America, whether that's an extremely liberal school up north like Middlebury, or a school that's known for being extremely conservative like Liberty University. It doesn't matter. You're going to see all sides of the aisle. That's just college. That's just what happens when you bring together people from literally all over the world. And so I think that like that's just something that people need to understand when they go to college. As far as my experience at Princeton, I think Princeton opened my eyes to understanding how racism can come from classism and just elitist type, mentality and values. I think that like you won't experience explicit racism ever at Princeton, just because like that's just not something that people are going to do. Like nobody's going to casually joke about it in their settings. And that's just my experience, and that's just my perception. That's not the case for some of my classmates probably, but like that's just kind of what I've gathered in my time there. However, you definitely will experience classism and elitism, if you will, that leads to some sort of racism from that. And so, Princeton didn't have its first black student. Princeton's one of the oldest colleges in the country. But the first black student didn't graduate until 1951. And so, there were a couple instances when I was at reunions, and like reunions are something that Princeton celebrates every year. It's like the biggest gathering of college alumni in the country. And it's something that Princeton really prides itself on. We have massive parties for the fifth reunion, the 10th reunion, 15th, 25th, however many years you graduated from college. And there have been a couple of times where I've been working at the older reunion sites. So say like the class of 1965 or the class of 1960, which they call the old guard. And there have been comments made at those reunion sites where alumni have been like, when I was here, we didn't have any women or any Negroes. And it's like, oh my God. It's like, wow, like you're from that generation. So you think it's okay to say that, but like, I can understand why. And something that's widely known about Princeton is a lot of black alumni do not like Princeton. A lot of older black alumni, because their experience was rooted in some deep racism, just because there wasn't any black people there for so long and there wasn't any women there. And so between sexist and racist institutions, like it made it hard for a lot of people to want to, experience Princeton. And so, Michelle Obama talks about it deeply in her book. It's like she had
You're talking about Becoming?
Yeah, exactly. So she talks about it deeply. And so as it relates to my experience, I had a great experience. Playing football was incredible because a locker room, you don't give a crap about what color somebody is. You care about how much effort you're going to put on the football field and what are you doing to be a good teammate, And that was an incredible experience for me because we were so diverse. However, I do have a lot of classmates that experience things that, quite frankly, are just ugly and nasty. And so that was generally my experience at Princeton, and, ways I've tried to help the university after by, doing what I can to, create opportunity for, disenfranchised groups on campus.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that because, I just think that's kind of the overarching thing that we've been talking about is, whenever we're talking about prejudice and racism, it's not that even though you promote it, that doesn't exist, right? Like even though you promote a diverse environment, it doesn't mean that racism and prejudice do not exist on your campus or your institution. It's just that you're combating it and you're hoping that it reduces, but it exists in a different way. And
exactly.
Yeah, and I appreciate you mentioning that because I think you gotta admit that before you can even like start the conversation, right? And it's like, I hear people that give me looks whenever I mention Baylor because Baylor is a predominantly white school and it has its own issues itself. But my thing is like those kinds like. Unless we can start saying that, hey, like this exists anywhere, we can't move forward. Like by you acknowledging that Baylor has its own issues, like what are we getting at here?
Right.
Anyway, so you mentioned this thing at the very end, Marcus. You said you were part of groups that were trying to promote diversity. And I think the conversation, especially at the collegiate level, is always kind of at the admissions front, right? Like it's most of these schools want to promote more diversity, but they struggle in doing so. And it creates this, like, I think you could know some of the issues that it does. And it's hard to talk about, frankly. And I think it doesn't get talked about very much. And you either say, oh, let's like increase the number of students that get into these schools, or I don't know. I think it's hard to have an honest conversation about it, right? And I'm sure people have come to you about this. So like, how do you kind of view this issue where you want universities to be more diverse? How do you think is the best way to like promote that?
I think the best way you create equality in America is by creating opportunity. So if you're a company, if you increase your hiring pipeline to not just include a bunch of kids from stuffy New England schools or stuffy preppy schools, then you're going to create diversity, you're going to create opportunity. Because for so long, there's just been, I'm going to people hire from networks. People build relationships from networks. That's just kind of how the world works. So it's like, if I went to Baylor, I'm more likely to go hire a guy from Baylor that was in the same fraternity I was at. And more than likely that person's going to be a white guy. And, I'm a theoretical white guy. That's what I'm going to do. And that's not how you create diversity in America. Yes, you want to show loyalty, but however, like, diversity wins in life. And the statistics have proven that time and time again. And so to answer your question, how do universities do this? I think they do this by just examining themselves. It's like, Baylor, what are we doing? I'm just using Baylor as an example because that's where my girlfriend went, and I just have a lot of love for Baylor, and I spent a good amount of time in Baylor throughout the year. But it's like, how do you help the minority groups on campus? How do you increase resources? How do you increase funding for like those student groups on campus? Like, I don't know if there's a Baylor Black Student Union. I don't know if there's a Baylor Southeast Asian Student Union. Like, what are you doing to show those students that, hey, I have a heart for you, and as such, we're going to increase the amount of resources that we have for you. And I think so many people hear the word affirmative action and they roll their eyes. They get so upset. They're like, that's not fair. I'm missing out on opportunities because of this kid in affirmative action. At the end of the day, you need to have policies like that. And that's very controversial to a lot of people. But like, there is so much systemic inequality in our country, especially in the educational system. So if you have a high achieving kid in a lower income area who doesn't have resources to this incredible SAT prep, who doesn't have resources to this incredible boarding school, but however has managed to become the valedictorian at this low income school and may not have had the same level of classes as this incredible boarding school, you want to give that kid an opportunity because it wasn't his fault he was born into poverty. It wasn't his fault. He grew up in a school district, or he grew up in a city in which they didn't receive proper government funding from the state to have the same resources as the kid who traditionally would get into great places like Baylor or University of Texas or Princeton. And so I think it starts at the university level. They got to increase resources and funding for student groups, increase diversity in your deans and your leadership. Don't just have a bunch of the same type of people, the same type of alumni leading your university. Increase diversity from that perspective. But also, a lot of it is on our state governments. We have to increase funding for low-income areas. We have to increase resources for low-income areas. We have to put better teachers to go into those areas to help those students. That is, in my opinion, how you help create diversity at the collegiate level.
Yeah, no, I like how you said that the kind of the input that you kind of talked about that leads to the issue is opportunity, and the only way we can create opportunity is through those grassroots level efforts.
Exactly.
That's good. And I think that's I'm glad you said it that way, because I think it helps me view it in a different way. Whereas in the past, it's always been talking about, okay, like number of spots that you can allocate towards a school. And it's like, no, that's not what it's about. It's like the problem starts a lot earlier. So that's good.
Exactly.
Marcus, let's talk about something that you do on your day job now. So investing.
Yeah.
So like, I know that like, let me just ask you this. Have you experienced, like, as you're like raising money, as you're like investing, as you're like in this world of venture capital, do you feel like you experience prejudice? Like, is that something that you're conscious of, or like you have like noticed?
Oh yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, like I'm not going to play the card that if people didn't want to invest in my fund, early on, or if people didn't want to work with me, or if, a conversation with an entrepreneur didn't go anywhere, I'm not going to always say that as a result of my skin color. A lot of times it's a result of the fact that I'm a 26-year-old. I don't have this same track record. I'm young, I haven't been through a recession or a cycle. And I recognize that a lot of time that's another reason. That's why people are like hesitant on moving forward with something like a firm like KXV or any young new startup venture capital fund. However, I've definitely experienced explicit acts of prejudice. Early this year, at the end of 2019, I was fortunate in being selected to the Dallas CEO 500, and it recognizes some of the top business executives in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. You got people like Mark Cuban and David Bonderman of TPG and all these incredible people. And, I was very humbled and honored to have been in that room, because Lord knows I didn't deserve it. However, I was wearing a nice suit. I was there with my business partners, and, we were there to receive that, acceptance, or if you will. I was handed a plate by a woman, and she said, "Hey, can you go get me a drink?" She handed me the plate, number one, and then she's like, "You might give me a drink." And here I am wearing like the best suit I own. And that's not saying much compared to what other guys in the room are wearing, but like, it's a pretty nice suit. It's a nice suit. It's a nice tailored suit. So it's hard to kind of, perceive that to be a suit of, whatever. And she handed me this plate. And in that moment, I looked at my business partner, Brandon, and I was like, oh my gosh, how the hell do I react to this right now? And what I did was I just put the plate down and I said, "Hey, ma'am, no, I completely understand the confusion. I'm actually being honored here tonight, but I'll gladly get you a drink. What would you like?" And she was like, "I'm so sorry, like whatever." But like, it just showed me that like, wow, this is 2019 or 2020, and we're still experiencing acts like that. Brandon and I were invited to participate at this really, really prestigious investment conference. And so Brandon and I walk in the room, we give a little quick speech, we talk about our efforts, and it was a very, very, very frosty response. In this room, there was maybe one other black person in the room. And then we went at the end of the kind of talking sessions. There was a really nice, fancy dinner, if you will. And we sat at a table, and the table was like 6 older white men and us. Not one person said hello to us. Not one person said, "Great chatting up there." Not one person tried to make small talk. Wow. And that was one of the coldest responses, one of the most prejudiced tables I've ever been in my life, because I just felt it. They didn't need to say how they felt for me to understand what they were thinking, And I think like for some people that makes them upset, that makes them sad. They're like, "Oh my God, America sucks." That pissed me off. I said, "F this, Brandon. Excuse my language. Let's go to work, baby. Let's go. Come on. Let's go. You have a problem with us? You have a problem with how I look? You have a problem with my youth? You have a problem with me being in front of this room speaking and looking like I'm in a position of power? You have a problem with the fact that I'm in this elite room of CEOs? I don't really care. This is America. This is a land of opportunity. I'm going to seize this opportunity. So if you want to be ignorant, you want to be prejudiced, that's just going to make me want to kick your ass even more and go out there and be successful, quite frankly." And so that is where, sorry for the language.
I love it.
But that is where my mind went in those times. And like, I'm not dumb. I'm going to experience this a lot of times in my career. But the more I get mad about it, the more I get upset about it, the more I'm going to potentially destroy opportunities for progress in that space. So how we go about it is, you may be racist, you may be ignorant, you may not like our story, you may not like who we are. Who cares? We're going to fight. And if you don't want to give us a seat at the table, then we're going to create our own table. So that's kind of what I've experienced in my day-to-day job. And like, honestly, it just fills me up. It's just like the coaches that tell you in high school, you're too skinny or you're not fast enough to play Division I football. Great. Well, let's keep working until there's a place that actually likes me. Let's go. And so that's kind of my mindset.
I love it, man. I love it. I love the fire. And I think what you talk about, your experience in groups, I think it's the most obvious, right? And I tell my friends about that too. It's like they ask me like, "Hey, like, how do you know that was like prejudice or racism?" I'm like, "Dude, I can just feel it. And I just know, And it's hard to explain that sometimes, but I think the examples you gave were really good. because it's clear. But Marcus, what about like in a one-on-one setting? Maybe like when you're pitching or you're in front of like a family office or something like that.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that, how have you noticed that people kind of like maybe show that prejudice unintentionally?
And I think a lot of it comes from, it goes back to kind of what I was talking about at Princeton, where you see the classism, elitism, and then that shifts towards the racism, if you will. So it's like you have a prejudice in your mind that I'm not of the same class, I'm not as elite as you are, simply because I'm the one pitching you for capital, and you think I may just be another young black kid from a rural town in Texas. So therefore, you're going to present our conversation in a condescending way to where you're not going to respect me like you would a 32-year-old white guy who went to SMU, something that you can relate to. And I'm just speaking to, like, if I were to do that with a family outside of Dallas. And so, candidly, I don't think I've been in a situation with a potential investor to where, and like Brandon would have a different response to this, because Brandon we've had different experiences. We've talked to different people at times. But candidly, for me, I don't think an investor has shown ignorance towards me because of the color of my skin. I think if an investor didn't invest, or if an investor wasn't really all bought in our conversation, it was because of my thesis, and it was because of my youth, because what I've learned is performance wins at the end of the day. People care about performance. Robert Smith is as black as it gets. You know what I mean? Frank Baker is another incredible black guy. And these guys are two titans. Orlando Bravo. These are three titans in the private equity industry. And like, they've been able to raise billions and tens of billions of dollars, and because their performance wins. And so I think what you're starting to see, and this is recent, hasn't been the case forever, but what you're starting to see is kind of like sports, people aren't looking as deeply at color as they had in the past. And I think it took somebody like Branch Rickey integrating baseball and bringing in Jackie Robinson, which ultimately created this massive pipeline of diverse talent. It took the first giant LP writing a check into Robert Smith's fund that has now created an opportunity for a ton of venture capitalists and private equity investors across the country. And so I think you're seeing a similar movement in the PE VC space that you saw in sports. And it takes time. Like, the MLB didn't integrate overnight simply because Jackie Robinson took there. It took time. It took Roberto Clemente. It took all these incredible people. And that's what it's going to take in my line of work for us to get to that level as well.
Sure. Yeah, I was actually going to mention that. It seems like you mentioned firms like Sequoia and some of these larger firms, Anderson Horowitz, starting these these funds to invest in minority groups that are companies that are owned by and led by minority owners. But I know that you're pretty close with Harlem Capital too, and those guys have that team has mentioned that they will only invest in minority-led owners. And I think you mentioned it earlier too. Like, it is very clear within the space that people, like women, people that are in minority groups, like that lead these organizations, they just do better. The returns speak for themselves. But it feels like sometimes like people like there's still like people that are like having to like promote this because it's just not happening. People those firms aren't being invested in. What are people missing, Mark?
They're missing pipeline. They're missing pipeline. Right now, I don't know the statistic off the top of my head, so I don't want to cite it, but there's a disproportionate amount of African Americans that attend HBCUs than they do, private white institutions. And so basically, the majority of black people still go to the black HBCUs. So if you're not giving resources to HBCUs, if you're not giving, capital or talent, or if you're not trying to recruit talent from those institutions, you're going to miss out on a ton of diversity. And that's something that every tech company, every investment firm has struggled with, is creating a pipeline of diverse talent from those institutions. Women, it goes back to the networks. You know what I mean? Like, guys are more likely to hire guys. They're more likely to hire somebody like them. They're more likely to hire a buddy of a buddy. That's just how business works. It sucks. It's stupid. And I think a lot of people are just intimidated. They're intimidated by the fact that a woman can come in here and run laps around some people in an investment firm with her ability to create an incredible investment and make incredible decisions. And so I think once people get over this pride of I need to recruit from my network and I need to diversify it and go and let women and let minorities come in here, you're going to get better. And I think you're starting to see that. I think a firm that I really love that has talked the talk and is starting to, kind of walk the walk more is SoftBank. You saw in the news that they launched a $100 million fund focused on just diverse founders and women. But like they've been doing stuff for disenfranchised communities for a long time. Like we've got to know a lot of investors and senior members of the SoftBank, and like they have mentored us, given us resources, and helped us in ways that no other firm has. And it's been such an incredible resource. Like I would say, some of the introductions and resources they've given us, like not from a capital perspective, from just mentorship and just general help, has turned our firm around. And I think seeing more firms take action like that, saying, hey, I'm going to be a mentor to you guys, I'm going to help you, is going to help spear change in the right direction, And it takes, candidly, it's going to take a majority of white men who are in these positions, because right now they still dominate leadership. They still dominate leadership in most companies. And for us, that was a white man at SoftBank named Andrew Kaufman. That was the guy who said, I'm going to help you guys through mentorship, through resources. And I just think that you'll see a bunch of guys like him and women like him who are going to emerge from this movement, who are going to make it their goal to help increase diversity pipeline for their companies.
Yeah, no, it's good. And Marcus, I told you I'd keep this conversation honest. So I got to ask you. So one of the things that I've noticed from my limited experience so far is that I think I've noticed that we are critical of those that are closest to us. And that's something I've noticed when I was like helping recruit like a group of people for this organization. And I noticed that one of the group, people that I identified as one of the groups, were critical of the people that were coming in from that next group that were in that same group. And it really caught me off guard, because I was like, hey, do you all recognize what you're doing? And they had to take a step back and say, wow, we are being overly critical here. And we didn't even recognize that. And I'm kind of wondering, do you notice that within the industry? Do you notice maybe just from your own experience, people that are African-American being more critical to those that are African-American? I don't know if that's something you experienced, but that's something I have. And I was wondering your thoughts on that.
Yash, you are such a smart guy, man. I tell people all the time, you're one of the brightest minds I know. You are so spot on. I think it's interesting. When I was growing up, I had heard a professional athlete tell me that I will never have a black man manage my money.
Wow.
Because I'm going to be much harder on him than I would be a white Jewish guy. And that just shook me to my core. I was like, wow, we're all about investing in our own community. We're all about creating opportunity. But you're telling me right now that you would never, and it was nobody I was close to. This was just a guy I'd met. I was just like, oh my gosh. And I think you, from a perspective, it's like candidly, if I had a young black mentor on my team, a young black analyst, I would be a lot harder on him or her, because I know that for them to succeed, they're going to have to work that much harder. They're going to have to be that much better. And so, yes, I am going to be more critical, because you have to be right now. It's like coaches in college. Coaches in college are much more critical on guys that have potential than guys that don't really have too much potential, And so I had a position coach, one of my favorite coaches, a guy named Steve Thomas. He was so tough on me. I mean, he was so annoying. He would grab me by the neck and be like, Marcus, come on, let's go. But he said, you have potential and you're a hardworking guy. I got to work you to the bone, because it's not about the impact you're going to have here at Princeton. It's about, I know the impact that you can have on the world. So I need to build these characteristics in you right now. And so that is something that I've been fortunate to be a part of. And so, listen, criticism, in my opinion, is part of love. It's a unique way of loving somebody, but it's part of love. Because if you're going to be critical about something, that shows that you care. If it's a kind critical, if you're not just being like a dick type critical, if you're trying to be kind critical.
Sure.
It's a way of showing love. And so it's like, if I love you enough to care about you enough to be critical about every little detail that you're doing right now, take it as a badge of pride that I see greatness in you. And so, yes, to answer your question, I do see criticism in the Black community and just other communities in general deeply.
Yeah, I just think it's one of those things that's good to recognize, and kind of like you said, it's good to just like mention it so that the person like knows why that's happening. So people aren't like caught off guard by it and they take it personally, right? But Marcus, I think this has been an incredible conversation, and I'm glad we're able to cover a lot of ground here. I thought I would maybe. Brother. Yeah, and I thought maybe we could end with, I kind of want to leave it up to you. I know, one of the things that's kind of unique about you is you majored in religion when you were in Princeton, and so I think that kind of gives you kind of a different perspective than most people when they, look at the world. Like the worldview that you have is probably different for most people. So how has that kind of shaped you as you're kind of thinking about a lot of these racial issues and things that we're talking about in America right now?
I think for me, man, it goes back to kind of what I said earlier. Like, I'm so fortunate in that I've experienced a lot of life, even though I'm only 26. And I have friends and mentorships and relationships with people from all different backgrounds and ethnicities. And I think for me, that has shaped my worldview, in addition to being a religion major and studying a bunch of religions. It's just shaped my worldview, and it's just shaped my perspective on how you approach people and you approach situations. I think when you approach anything with a mindset of conflict or a mindset of fight, you aren't going to get the results that you initially want. It's going to take time. It's going to be, it's going to be ugly. It's going to be messy. But if you approach conflict, and this is good for business, this is good for marriage. I'm not married, so I don't, maybe I should think of that. This is good for business. This is good for relationships. This is good for friendships. The more open you are and the more willingness to be open and have humility towards things, the better your life will be. The more people will respect you, the more you will receive, because empathy wins in the end. Humility wins in the end. And I think that leaders set the tone. Leaders set the tone. The most incredible, the most badass leader I've ever been around in my life was a guy named William McRaven, Admiral William McRaven. A lot of people know his name because he had the speech that went viral at the University of Texas called Make Your Bed.
That's right.
He had an incredible book called Make Your Bed. I spent the weekend with him last summer at a football camp in Princeton. And seeing the way that man led just in that 2-3 days, and just seeing how NFL Hall of Famers responded to him speaking, and just seeing NFL coaches respond to him speaking the way he was, and just the language he used and the language of unity he used was just so incredible. So I think people can really improve themselves by learning from people like William McRaven, by learning from great leaders, by reading about great leadership, by reading about people who were known to be extremely humble and kind, and that can help shape your worldview. In addition to, obviously, if you're a Christian, reading the Bible, but not everybody's a Christian, so I'm just trying to give an alternative perspective. Like I said, I think our country is extremely divided right now, and I just think that that is the best way you go about helping repair and reconciliate some of these things. And so that's how I look at the world right now. That's my view. I just want to attack every day with empathy and love and fire. That's it. And if I can win the day with those three things, then we're going to see a better world. And that's just how my mindset is right now.
That's good. I love it. Marcus, it's I know every time I'm gonna do something with you or I get on the phone with you, I'm gonna get a lot of energy, and this conversation definitely did not disappoint. So hey, I appreciate you for doing this and kind of sharing your thoughts.
Of course,
and man, I look forward to seeing you soon, Marcus.
Likewise, man. Appreciate you having me. Take care.
Yeah, of course.